Hey, we are kicking off the start of Pride Month with a registration event for our summer coaching and accountability groups. It's on Thursday, June 1st at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern.
This group is like a scaffolding for us to move from intention to action. And the scaffolding is above the muck and the stories and everything else. If you have a scaffolding in a building, you're renovating it. You could be renovating or renewing it. And that building is us.
Another thing about this group is that you learn and are held accountable for actually practicing the skills over and over again. And so that's been really, really helpful. If you're thinking about joining this group, there's really nothing like being with a bunch of ADHDers, and that we're a really remarkably diverse group of people. I was surprised at how varied everyone was, except for the one thing, which is that we all have ADHD.
We are also still offering a $500 discount on selected sections. We'll tell you more about that at the break. Or go now to coachingrewired.com and add your name on our interest list. All right, let's get on with the episode. ADHD Rewired, episode 485. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Liz Angoff. Liz is a licensed educational psychologist with a diplomat in school neuropsychology, providing assessment and consultation services to children and their families in the Bay Area. She is the author of the Brain Building books and is constantly creating new tools to help parents and providers empower children to help them understand their unique brains. More info can be found on her website at brainbuildingbook.com. And welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm really excited to be here.
We're going to take a kind of a unique, spin angle on some of this today. We're going to get kind of personal on this, talking sort of about the intersection of when my son's neurodivergence and my neurodivergence collide and how we kind of deal with that. Because I think that there's probably lots of parents here who have ADHD. So I think this will be helpful for all of you. So first, we met at this past year's CHAD conference in 2022, and we just kind of became fast friends.
True. Something aligned about our passions, I think, about really helping people understand their stories. And what really struck me is that you said your mission was helping adults understand and rewrite their ADHD story.
Yeah.
And my mission in the world is helping kids understand and create their personal narrative, whether that's about ADHD, autism, or whatever neurodiversity, neurodivergence comes to them. So I think there's just a huge intersection.
That's awesome. I remember when you told me too that one of your favorite things to do is to help have that conversation with families and with kids about their diagnoses. And when I used to do my clinical work, especially when I was working with kids with autism, like that was my very favorite thing to do. And, so kind of talking about how that diagnosis process works. And I usually will deliver it with a congratulations.
I love these conversations. It was amazing when I started to pull my focus from my clinical work, because I do neuropsych assessments for a living. And the way that we are all trained to do neuropsych assessments is to really talk to parents. And if we've had good training, we're bringing parents along in our journey, being very collaborative with parents, which is not the norm, but is luckily part of the conversation. But then the child is kind of left in the dust. They're the one who did all the work. And then we're like, okay, good luck to you. Here's your prize. And so many kids leave that process thinking okay, I did all this stuff. She told me it was a bunch of games, but not all of the games were fun. And they're definitely talking behind my back. And one thing that like I've really learned the more I talk to kids is that the transparency factor is so important for our neurodivergent kids. So just coming like right from the get-go, like, hey, stuff is hard. We are actually here to unpack what's hard and make it better. And I need you. And then at the end, we're going to talk about what we learned and having parents in that. And then the crazy thing that happened was that as soon as I started turning my focus to talking to kids, parents started reporting that they understood their kids better.
Mm.
I write a beautiful 30-page report after my neuropsych assessments. It's gorgeous. And more than one parent said, the workbook you gave to my kid, that's the thing I bring to IEP meetings because I understand that. And that's what helped me understand my kid. When I saw their neuropsych results in their words with illustrations, it clicked. And now I get it. And there is something so important about that translation and really understanding kids' lived experiences that just was amazing, not only for kids and empowering kids, but actually helping parents come on the same page. And then the next thing I hear is, can you evaluate me too? As parents start to understand their kids, most parents are related to their children. And so they start to see their own qualities. And we weren't talking about this in this neurodivergent, affirming way when we were growing up. And so many of us have masked our way through life, didn't get diagnosed, have these negative narratives, or were diagnosed and have a really negative self-image of it. And now it's like, okay, I understand my child now. I want to understand myself.
Yeah.
And then now we're going to shift the entire dynamic of our family, which just like has blown my mind over and over again as like this work.
So
moves
what's your kind of diagnostic story? ADHD, share that a bit.
So I am wired very anxiously and I own my anxiety. I think it makes me an awesome psychologist. I did crisis response for a long time when I worked for a large urban school district. And so I started to understand that the way that I am wired makes me really good at that job because I hit my flow when I can respond to crisis. And obviously I don't want more crisis in the world, but there is crisis in the world. And the fact that putting that thing together, that this anxiety that drives me nuts, and that I have had to learn how to manage my whole life, there's actually a purpose there. And the way that I'm wired is really important to what I can give to the world. And I think it helps in those moments of anxiety, like when the anxiety is impairing me, to be like, okay, this is not something I want to get rid of. I just need to learn how to turn it down in this moment because I'm picking up on something here. It's paralyzing me. I want to be able to act on it. So I got to get more control over the dial. Understanding those quirks has been really, really helpful. I also, as I've gotten more involved in the neurodiversity movement, I'm starting to become aware of my sensory differences and my sensory sensitivities. And that has been huge. Like your listeners can't see me, but I am on a ball right now and I bounce all the time. It helps me stay regulated. It works with my system. And then understanding what happens to my brain at the end of the day when I'm in overwhelm mode is really important for me as a parent. So I have a 4.5-year-old who can be very big, and like, if we're talking about the intersection of neurodivergence, like understanding my sensory sensitivities and what it is for me to be on sensory overwhelm has been so important to communicating with my kid. Because when we're at dinner and he's tired from his day and I'm overwhelmed from my day, and all I want to do is be like, stop touching me. I have this awesome, amazing, cuddly kid who just wants to be in my lap all the time. And I think if I didn't understand my own neurodivergence, it would come out as just stop. Yeah. But instead, we can have this conversation of, you know what, I'm overwhelmed. I'm overtouched right now. I want to be connected with you, but let's sit side by side instead of on top of me. And then we can have this conversation.
That's such an affirming kind of way to do that. You're validating that you love how they want to be loving with you. And right now, your capacity that you can do it this way. Yeah.
And you know what? He told me the other day, I pick him up from preschool and I'm like, what happened in your day? He will often ignore me. And the other day, now that we've been having this conversation for a while, he said, Mama, it's hard for me to talk right after my day is done. Oh, okay. What should we do when your day is done? Can we play music? Yeah, let's play music. And now we have a mutual way to talk about overwhelm because he sure inherited all the stuff I just talked about. And it shows up in his way. It shows up in unique ways for him. But having that ability to talk about how we show up in the world, and we haven't used diagnostic terms. It's just like, this is my experience. And now, because I've been able to model that, he is starting to use that language also, which is just like proud mama moments.
Yeah.
Oh,
man.
it's amazing, right?
So professionally, how much are you using sort of self-disclosure in your process when you're talking to parents and kids?
I bring it up as needed. I mean, I don't go into details. I will often tell kids that, like, the way my brain is wired, we call it anxiety, and it's part of what makes me really good at my job, because it's part of what helped me really listen to you and be patient when it was hard for you to talk to me. Or do you remember that moment when, like, part of that is like my emotions are very strong and very sensitive. And so I can pick up on other people. And as I've learned how to do that, it's made me really good at my job. And so as we learn about you, it's going to make you really good at the thing that you want to do. So as it's relevant, I'll bring things up in generalities. I'm also a horrible speller. And I open with that with parents, like, please excuse anything that comes across in writing. Give me a little bit of patience. And that's been really helpful for like occasions when I don't do that. So I talk about my brain openly and just the things that work well for me, things you may see in my process, like my ideas are rampant. I'm going to like get them out to you as quickly as possible. That means there may be spelling mistakes. You know, when I talk to kids, like, I will share, if they ask, a lot of kids will flat out be like, so are you like me? Like, you know, like, what's going on there? I also talk about the fact that we don't have to diagnose everything. So there's a lot of things that I'm still learning about myself as an adult that are really important to know about how I show up in the world at different points in different situations. And some of those may be diagnostically relevant, and some of them might just be how I am. So having a vocabulary to talk about that, I think, is really important.
And I think having those models for how to talk about these kinds of things are so important, because, you know, we don't have any examples and these are hard conversations. It's, how do you know what to do?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So as we've talked about before, you know, so my son, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, we actually had a whole episode. It was just him. And we were talking about some of the challenges that I have with my own son. I think it was maybe your idea, like, well, what if we kind of explore that using some of the different approaches that you've come to learn and to develop. And so I thought that maybe we can maybe explore that and dive into that. So before we do that, you have a couple books that you've written. You have The Parent's Guide to Explaining ADHD, The Parent's Guide to Explaining Autism, The Parent's Guide to Explaining Dyslexia. What about The Kid's Guide to Explaining Your Parents? That should be your next one.
That'll be the next one.
That could actually be really helpful.
So those books right now are kind of in process, but there are articles on my website that are the launching pad for the full book. My website is brainbuildingbook.com/parents. And on there, you'll find the blog. The blog has how to explain ADHD to kids, how to explain autism to kids. Those are all available in downloadable PDFs also, so you can print it out and have it with you. And I also, part of the upcoming books that are geared towards parents is a script for literally fill in the blank. How do I explain what I learned from my child's assessment to my kid?
Oh, that's so important. I can't tell you how many times I've seen where family gets an assessment and they're handed the 30-page document that is written by someone like you without like any explanation of what it all means.
Oh, so can we talk about that for a second?
Sure.
Like what you do with that?
Sure.
Yeah. So the model that I came up with for talking to kids, and I mentioned already that in doing this for kids, parents are like, oh, that's what this all means, which is a whole nother topic in our profession, like how we communicate results, period. So we'll put a pin in that. But what I do is I take my 30-page report that's written for other professionals and all of that, and I condense it into a 1-page summary that has 4 boxes. And this little 4-box summary is on the parent resource page that I just mentioned, the brainbuildingbook.com/parents. And it has a box where you can list your child's highways. And that's how I talk about their strengths. So if we think about your brain is constantly under construction, You're constantly building, learning, and growing, right? And so there are things that come easily to you. And you can think about these as your brain's highways, things that go fast, things that come easily, the roads that you've been that are wide and easy to travel because you've done it so much. And so what I'll do is put just kind of like the top 5 strengths that are really important to know about your kid. What are their highways? And then there's your construction zones, right? Those are the things that you're building. And so what are the top 3 things that are really important for your kid to focus on that we really want to know are harder for your kid, the skills they're building, the things that are under construction? And that metaphor is very intentional because these are not roadblocks. They're not potholes. They are not permanent barriers. They're things that you are working on that are important for your brain. And then there's helpful words, which could be a diagnosis or just terms like executive functioning or flexibility, like things that are just important terms. Like in my house, we do talk about like sensory overload. And then the tools in your construction crew. So how are you actually going to build your brain? And those are the recommendations. So again, top 5 recommendations, because in any report you get, there's going to be pages and pages. And it's like, okay, where do I even start this? So being able to just like have that summary and be able to ask your provider of all the things you said, what are the top 5 things that are important to understand about my kid? Is just a really important question to ask. And then that's going to help you talk to your kid. In this script that's part of the parent resources, it actually guides you to write in 5 strengths and 3 construction zones. And then it tells you how to tell these things to your child in a way that's going to make sense to them. And you can use it to press your provider to translate things for you into comprehensible language. So I'm hopeful it's helpful in that way.
That's that important self-advocacy piece too, about how to like make this make sense. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to pick your brain about some stuff going on at my house.
You got it.
So we will be right back. Registration for our summer coaching and accountability groups is going on now. Don't miss your chance to join us this summer. Space is super limited, so go to coachingrewired.com to learn more. Are you driven by a clear vision of where you want to be and want to accelerate your progress towards your next milestone? Or perhaps you're feeling uncertain about the future and are seeking clarity, wanting to break free from being stuck and make meaningful progress on your most important goals. Whatever your situation, ADHD Rewired's award-winning coaching and accountability groups can provide you the support you need. So if you want to learn how to better manage your time, take charge of your calendar, create a to-do list that makes sense for your ADHD brain, all while having supportive accountability to get your to-dos done with a group of like-brained adults with ADHD, then go to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our spring interest list. Because here at ADHD Rewired, our coaching and accountability groups are more than just the skills and tools. What sets us apart is being able to provide a space that cultivates community and connection, empathy and understanding, and not having to face our challenges alone. It doesn't matter if you're brand new to your ADHD diagnosis or you just got re-diagnosed for the 3rd time because you forgot about it the first 2 times, or you've been on this journey for a while. We're going to meet you where you are at. Come join us this summer. Go to coachingrewired.com and get your name added to our summer interest list. Also, get a $500 discount on select sections. See the website for details. Once you've added your name, we'll send you instructions on what you'll need to complete so you can join us this Thursday, June 1st at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And if you are listening to this after that date, check the website to find out when our next registration event is. That's coachingrewired.com. We can't wait to meet you, and we're looking forward to growing with you. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back. So let's talk about the world of the Tibbers household with me and my son Gibson. Where should we begin?
One helpful place to begin is a really specific problem that's been happening. We can talk about things in generalities, but that's not the way that we solve problems, right?
Let's get specific here. Okay. So, and this has been something that it's been, I think, for kind of forever. So, my son is thrice exceptional, ADHD, autism, highly gifted. He will talk to me about stuff that it sounds awful to say this, but I couldn't care less about. Like, I'm so bored out of my mind. It's like breaks my brain. And like, it is that like painful, boring feeling of like, oh my God, is this gonna be over soon? And like, and internally, I'm also like, he's trying to connect with me, and like, how do I just engage so we can have that connection? And like, my mind just goes into like rapid mind wandering mode. And I've shared with him that like, I'm so sorry. I know that you love this, and there's nothing wrong with you loving this. Part of my brain, just if I'm not kind of interested in it, it's really hard for me to stay focused on it. Like, so we do have a lot of that self-awareness conversation. Um, but it's tough because it's like he just wants to kind of, I think he needs to be a college professor so he can just talk about what he wants to talk about for hours on end. Help.
Right. Yeah. So the first thing, well, first of all, I mean, like you have just such a beautiful connection with your son. And if anybody has not heard the podcast where Eric interviews his son, it is amazing and heartwarming and just knocks it out of the park, both of you guys. And I think that starting from a place of like, this is my child trying to connect or trying to do something positive is such an important place to start from. And so, and this is true for this, kind of situation, but also, when kids have like really difficult, explosive behaviors and like they are trying to do the best they can with the skills that they have, right? And so this situation, your kid is trying to connect, right?
Well, and it's funny too, because he has, he'll say stuff like, sorry, Dad, I know I'm monologuing right now, but then he'll continue. And it's just like, oh, and then I'll like try to like engage with him and then try to sort of like that like taffy pulling. I'm like trying to stretch it to something else that we could kind of talk about, but connecting it to what he is talking about. Like he loves everything with like numbers, and he's like really into this show it's on YouTube, it's Number Lore. And the challenging part is helping him understand like it's fine that he loves this. Like he can love whatever he wants to love. Like it's fine, but also to be able to have that like sort of mental flexibility and social radar to be able to pick up on, oh, the person that you're talking to about this right now has zero interest in what you're saying. So you have to switch gears.
Right, right. So I think the very first thing that can be really helpful is identifying what the problem is. And sometimes that can be hard, right? Because it's like, oh, this is boring. But there's kind of like a more profound problem or something like a problem that you guys can both agree on that's happening here. And so before we get into like why it's a problem for you and why it's a problem for him, like what is the difficulty? Like, what's the situation? How would you talk about like a situation or a time that's difficult for you guys that he would recognize? Oh yeah, that's a time that's difficult for us. If it's helpful, I can take a stab at it from what you just said.
Okay.
So the problem might be something like I noticed that we're both having difficulty when you have a lot of stuff to share with me about number lore, and I'm having when you have a lot of stuff you want to share with me about number lore. Period. Okay. And so is that like something he would recognize? Like, oh yeah, I can remember yesterday we had that conversation and okay, cool. All right. So being able to like identify like a space and time that your child's going to recognize, like remember yesterday when, and this is part of getting really, really specific, because when we talk about things, again, we got to get to like a time and a place where I can like remember and put myself there. And for kids, that's usually yesterday because there's really no other day. If you have a young child like mine, it's this morning. So that's like your window. But, we're taking a time when we're not in the middle of it, because that's when like emotions run high. Like, I really need to tell you this and I'm really bored out of my mind, right? But we're talking another time that we're outside of that. And we can kind of think about it and reflect on it when we're in our thinking brains, not in our like emotional, like I need this now kind of brain. And then the next piece, and what I'm doing here is I'm really pulling off of this amazing psychologist named Ross Greene, who wrote this book called The Explosive Child. And he has an approach called collaborative proactive solutions, which is just so helpful for all kids, but it's become really, really relevant for neurodivergent kids. And the piece that I will add here that I think has shown in the work I've been doing with families is that there's going to be a piece here where as an adult, I have to talk about my adult concerns. And when we are also neurodivergent, I think sometimes that actually can be really hard. Like, what is my concern? What are my needs in this situation? Especially as a parent, when you're like, ugh, I just need to make my kid happy. Like, I don't have needs, but like knowing that it's okay for us to have needs becomes really, really important.
It's funny when you say that, like in part of my own, I guess, like parent guilt is like feeling like I'm not just having this feeling if I just need to make my kid happy. Like, because I know I see other parents who are like, they engage with the stuff and it's mind numbing, but like they seem to be able to do it. And I'm like, I feel like it's so hard for me to do it. So as you were talking to, one thing that where some of the challenge stems from when we are, whether it's talking about a topic that he's, kind of monologuing about, the other issue is he is hyperverbal. Like the thoughts move at 1,000 miles an hour, the words move even faster. And I have auditory processing problems. And so I need a little bit of time to process what he just said. And so like he'll ask me a question or he'll say something and I'm like, I'm trying to gather my words and then he's on to the next thing. And which makes it so hard to like have a real conversation back and forth.
Okay, so this piece is really important because you understand your child's processing so well. And I think what we started with that, like really making sure you understand your child's profile and their neurodivergence is a key piece to this. So knowing when their brain works best, what are their highways, and then knowing what they're working on, where their construction zones are going to help like first with the first step, which is the empathy step. And that's understanding like what's going on for my child. They're not trying to drive me crazy. They are not trying to piss me off. They're not trying to do anything. They are trying to get their needs met. They are trying to connect. They are trying to do their best that they can in the world. So the first step to this process is really understanding your child's experience, right? So when we're in this situation where you really want to tell me something, what's that like for you? What's going on for you? And we might learn about like what's tricky about, and it might sound something like what's difficult about stopping talking, or what's difficult about, waiting to tell me something until like I'm ready, or what's that like for you? Like, I really want to understand what's difficult about slowing down. We're really trying to understand Gibson's experience and what that's like for him. And we're doing two things here. One, we're helping him to articulate his needs and his experience, which kids are developing their narrative. They're developing their way of talking about things. So we're taking guesses. We're asking for his ratings. Like, did I get that right? 5 stars, 3 stars? Like, how'd I do? Or tell me more about that. We're pulling things out. And Dr. Green has awesome questions about like how to do this in the process, but it helps kids to articulate it. The other thing that we're doing, which is most important really, is that we are getting insight into what's going on for our kids. We have a lot of adult theories about what they're doing, but I will tell you, we are really bad at our theories. We are always wrong. And time and time again, when we talk to kids, like as they like start to get used to explaining what's going on for them, we learn things. And there's that aha moment of like, ooh, I didn't know that piece. And that can shift things.
I know one of the things that I found super helpful when I first got introduced to Ross Green's work was this idea that like, why a lot of the problem solving you're doing isn't working? Because you haven't identified the right problem, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? It's because we're making these assumptions and not actually like checking in with our kids to say, is that right? Or even giving them that opportunity to learn how to express what's actually going on. And one of my favorite things, and I apply this to my coaching practice all the time, and that's the idea that like, assuming we've even identified the right problem, we have to also accept that like, we're probably not going to get it right on the solutions the first, second, or even third time, right? And that's part of the process. So keep coming back to revisit that is such a really strong coach approach to kind of how because it's about experimentation, evaluation, and assessment.
Right. And I've actually been told by others that this idea of construction zones and brains under construction really aligns with the coach approach, because what we're saying is that like we're constantly under construction and redoing things. And as adults, we are too.
Yes.
And so we might try a solution. It might work, it might not work, but we're going to build that into the process. And it's amazing how that builds in flexibility to kids too, because we're preparing them for the fact that we're going to evaluate this and see how it works. It's an experiment.
I wrote down that question though about because it's one of those like questions when I hear someone else say it, it's like, why have I not asked that question before? And it's what's difficult about slowing down. I'm going to ask him that today at dinner. I am looking forward to asking that to him because that's So let's do this. We have to transition to a break, but when we come back, I want to talk about one of our other difficulties we have, and that's with transitioning.
Okay.
So we will be right back. Hello, dear listeners. Whether you're a longtime listener of the show or a newcomer, welcome. If you've found this podcast informative and worthwhile, and if it adds value to your day, there is a way that you can support us by becoming a patron by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Perks for becoming a patron include getting full and uninterrupted episodes of this show starting at just $5 a month. If you want some additional support and are looking for a taste of group coaching, then consider becoming a patron at the $25 a month level to join me every fourth Tuesday of the month for a monthly group coaching call on Zoom. Or you can get the audio recordings of those coaching calls for just $10 a month. Really, I am so thankful for all of our patrons, and no matter your contribution, I am really grateful for your support. If you're not a patron yet, but want to join the Patreon community and get some extra perks, and if you're in the position where you can support this show, consider joining us now by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon and become a patron. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thank you so much. And we're back. All right. So before when we were on the break, you mentioned that you wanted to actually cover or identify the idea of like really addressing the concerns as a parent.
Yeah. So I think like a really powerful part that like Ross Green's work brings to our neurodiversity conversation is that we are not only figuring out what the kids' needs are, but we're also thinking about what our adult concerns are. And for me, part of this is understanding like what are my needs as an adult. So I had told you for me and my son, like I get some sensory overwhelm. So when we're solving problems, like being able to know like, oh, that's what's happening for me, and to be able to explain that is really, really important. I think like the other part of your conversation with Gibson turns into, okay, so now that I understand what's going on for you, my concern is this. So like I validate all of those things. I want to connect with you. I want to learn. I'm so excited. You're excited about things. I understand now why it's hard for you to slow down. Here's some of the things that are going on for me. And then the last step is to say, I wonder if there's a way that we can make it work for you and make it work for me. Ross Green talks about we want a win-win. So it's not about compromise. Like if you suffer a little, I'll suffer a little. That's not what we're talking about. How can we really make it work? How can we make sure, Gibson, that you have time to like really just deep dive? And how can we make sure that we're doing it in a way that I can really stay with you? Let's come up with some solutions together and try them out, like we said. And we're going to run some experiments. And we always give first dibs to the kid, because you will be surprised. And especially for a kid like Gibson, I bet you he's got some ideas. And then you evaluate them for, is it going to work for my brain and your brain? And I think the main piece of the neurodiversity affirmative conversation that's come alive is that we really need to understand people's lived experience. That's what this movement is about. And so if we want to be neurodiversity affirming when we talk to kids, we have to talk to them. We have to understand their experience. And this is one way that is really helpful to do that. So,
So are you then asking what the concern is?
Do you want to do that? We can do that and see if we can like prepare you for this conversation with Gibson.
I mean, I think it's it's the small concern of like, is he going to be able to grow up to be a functioning adult?
What is your concern? Like, can you get more specific? about something that would be relevant in that moment. Like, what's your concern in that moment?
I definitely think I have the tendency to see a particular behavior and then like making this assumption, what if he doesn't improve in this area when he's like in his 20s? Like this is not gonna go well. Like, and I'm very mindful that it's a jump into conclusions and kind of catastrophizing a bit. But like as his parent who has worked with lots and lots of kids with autism, and I've seen what happens when interventions aren't in place when they're young, right? So I've seen like how it can go bad. I have that sort of parenting philosophy that like every moment's a teachable moment. But then I also like worry that like, is he gonna like at some point feel like he's just being criticized all the time, which I'm also very mindful of, like trying to really celebrate. Like we celebrate our weirdness in our house, and he loves it. Like whenever we're kind of just being goofy, and I'm like, well, that was weird. He's like, thanks, Dad. Like and he's genuine. Like it's totally like so. It's so. Yeah, I think it's part of it is like him being able to at least like recognize and own that there's things that he needs to work on.
Yeah, I think like part of where this model leads us and in thinking about what impacts the most change, this kind of research around change, the more specific we get, the more likely we are to create change. But then what happens is we have an exponential effect. So when you have in the back of your mind, like, will my child be a functional adult? Is this ever going to shift? When we shifted in this conversation, just when you guys are talking about number lore, and you can say, well, for me, when you talk really quickly, I get overwhelmed easily. So I wonder if there's a way we can have this conversation, but we can do it in a way that it's easier for me to hear. What you're doing in that moment is you're teaching your child to listen to your specific needs and adapt. And then we're successful in that situation. And then the next time something similar happens, because with your adult brain, you're going to make a connection that when he is trying to be friends with a kid and it's not going well, and maybe part of the reason it's not going well is because he is monologuing beyond the other child's ability to engage. So if that similar theme is coming up, then we can talk, how we solve this problem with us? Because now we're building on a success. I wonder if something similar is happening. Does it feel similar or different when you're talking to Johnny? I wonder if there's something slightly different that you could do. Let's think about problems. And now you've helped Gibson make that connection. And now we do that a couple of times. And now he's recognizing like, oh, I'm in a similar situation. I know some ways to solve this problem. Let me try those things. And especially for autistic kids, I think this is really helpful to make those explicit connections because it's like, oh, okay, this is how it applies here. This is how it applies here. And you can start to log some kind of examples in data to build on.
It was interesting, even this morning. So he's he plays in the band, and he does not love that he has to be at school earlier because of band. And so this morning he was kind of moving slowly. So I'm trying to get him to have a little bit of urgency in moving along. And he was like getting frustrated with me because he was like, "Oh, why are you so angry?" I'm like, I'm expressing urgency. I'm not angry at all." And then like and he does this often, and I sometimes think he's like messing with me, but like his response was, "Oh, thanks, Dad, for explaining that. I didn't understand." Like, and it's so genuine. Like, it's so genuine that it's like, wait, is he messing with me? Like, but it is. It's a very genuine response. So there are still a lot of those. I don't know. It's like a lot of nuance in it, but like this idea of when we're with others, like we're trying to focus on relationship building and connection, where he's just thinking about what's the activity we're supposed to be doing here. He had an issue with some peers from he was in a group chat, and they wanted to do something, and they had a pre-plan. They all agreed on doing this thing, and he wasn't wanting to do it that way. Like he wanted to be his full creative self and do it his complete. And so they were getting frustrated with him. It's not that they didn't like him, and so like we had to go back and kind of like go back to the very beginning of the chat and be like, okay, so see, this was the group plan. And the reason they were getting frustrated because you were not following the group plan. You were following Gibson's plan and not considering how that was impacting others. And I kind of been seeing that seems to be happening a little bit more as he's been trying to navigate a lot of these social things. And, he's in 6th grade, and like, I don't know any neurodivergent adult who can look back on middle school and be like, that was a good time. Like
we need like collective like middle school trauma recovery groups.
Like middle school is awful.
Well, I mean, another thing to remember is that like the way development goes, we have to relearn and reintegrate a lot of these skills as we reach another milestone. So
That's
a lot
helpful.
of times we'll see that like as a 10-year-old, our kid had better executive function than a 13-year-old, right? And like, because we got new things coming in, there's new things to do. And so on the social front, like the way that 10-year-olds communicate and the way the 12-year-olds communicate is pretty vastly different. Even like the way kids communicate when they're kindergartners and then third grade is a big shift because developmentally. And so you kind of get the rhythm and then you like add hormones and it's like, oh God, like now I got to reorient.
Yeah.
And so it's not like a regression or a loss of skills. It can feel like, oh my God, we're still going over this, but it's not. Your child has new things.
That's helpful. It's so funny how many things like this where it's like, oh, I know these things, but I like when it comes to your own kid, there's like this blindness to it. It's,
same. I feel like there's like a mom part of my brain and a professional part, and they are like very well separated. So if you ever want to talk to me about my own kid, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
I still remember when a couple of years ago, my son went to a camp specifically for kids with ADHD. And part of this camp required the parents to attend the weekly parent training. And, here we are. I'm like, oh, I could be leading this thing. I could probably be doing this. Blah, blah, blah. And there's this one strategy that they were very sort of adamant on. And that's like you give the direction and then shut up and count to 10 in your head. Because like what we often do is like we give the direction, they haven't moved in 1.5 seconds. And so we give it again and again and again. And I started doing that. And he complied like 95% of the time when I just gave him time to process the direction. Oh my God. It was one of those simple things that I would recommend to any other parent that didn't even occur to me.
Yeah. I feel like we all have those stories as professionals. I had my child late. So I had been telling parents what to do for at least 15 years before I had my own kid. And I think we all have a version of that story, right? Where it's like, oh, that's what it's like.
All right. I know we only have a few minutes here. I wanted to see if we can tackle maybe one more issue here, and that's the issue of transitioning.
Yeah.
So Gibson does not like doing outings very much. And what's the thing that is sort of puzzling to me sometimes is that like once we're at the place, he's typically good. Like he never wants to go to the store, which I get because I don't really ever want to go to the store too. So like when we have to do an errand together, like I feel like I already have my own internal resistance and then he's just adding to it. And it's so hard. Help, Dr. Liz.
So I think this is an awesome way to review like this process, right? So in the moment, it's really hard to do anything. So like once you're like on the train of we got to go to the store and we're resisting, it's really hard to solve problems in that moment. But when we have a little bit of space, we can go back to that very moment. And again, we're going to do very specifically. Remember, because we think about my kid has trouble with transitions. Let's think about the last time they had trouble with transition. Remember this morning we were trying to go to the store? What was tricky about that? And I would never say to a kid, remember this morning when you were having difficulty with transitions? No. Remember when we were trying to go to the store? It seemed like you were having difficulty. What's up? What was tricky about that? And then we can really figure out together, get very curious, get our magnifying glass out. What was going on? What was that like for you? And ask a lot of questions about like, what was hard? When did it get hard? Was it when I asked you? Was it when you got up in the morning? Was it when it was time to go to the car? And really get curious about what was difficult. And then we can present our own needs. Like, here's my concern. We need milk. And, my concern is that I can't leave you home alone.
He'll be like,
we
just
need
Instacart
milk.
It, Dad. Just Instacart it.
So that's a really good idea, Gibson. My other concern is about money. And Instacart, there's an additional fee there. So if we Instacarted everything, we'd go broke really quick. And I wouldn't be able to buy you any toys. So That's like great idea, but we got to keep thinking. And also my other concern is that like when it's hard for us to get out of the house, I get frustrated, you get frustrated, and then we get into a big ball of frustration and nobody's happy. And then an outing that could be okay, I'm not saying it's going to be fun, it could have been okay, turns into an outing that is awful and horrible and we both hate it and neither one of us is happy. So I wonder if there's a way that we can help you with the things that were challenging for you. And maybe like, I don't know, what do you think he would say that's hard to go to the store?
He just doesn't want to leave the house.
It's hard for me to leave the house.
I think
Mhm.
part of what's behind it is, I think we are really like dealing with a genuine screen addiction.
It's hard to leave my screens.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it is. I mean, that's when he said to me he wanted to drop out of band, like when we sort of talked about it, it was because he wants screen time in the morning.
Yeah.
And so I was like, thank you for sharing that. That is not going to be a reason that you are going to be able to drop out of band. Like that is actually
Yeah.
going to be a reason that I'm going to insist you continue to go to band.
So I'd be really curious, like, okay, so what is it about screen time that's hard to end it? Can you tell me more about what's going on? And like, can we figure out, is it harder in this circumstance than other circumstances? Like, what's going on for you? What really makes it challenging? Because then we might be able to figure out a way to, as I said, to do a win-win. So screen time is important for a lot of kids. And for a lot of neurodivergent kids, it's their downtime where no one's asking anything of them
Right.
and they're in complete control. And giving them spaces for that is so critical. But it's hard for them to leave it because any kind of state change is hard. And now you're asking me to leave something that feels so good to go do something that is probably going to be like meh to awful.
And I do try to make sure that we're not going from screens to a number for an activity.
Right.
Right. And I do try to give him plenty of transition time warning and all the stuff that is.
Yeah. And these are great adult theories, right? That help a lot of kids. And we'll get ourselves often like 80% of the way there. But we're talking about that last 20%. And that's when we really need to talk to Gibson. Like we need to know what's going on for you and how do we help make both of these things possible, that you get the screen time that you need, that we help you, like, it doesn't feel like such a shock, using his words, but it doesn't feel, like I'm just thinking about other kids, the way they've described it. Like, it doesn't seem like such a shock.
It's boring to him.
Oh,
the story.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Like, let's see if there's a way we can make it so it's not so boring. I can't promise it's going to be Disneyland, but we can find a way to make it not so boring.
It was funny. I was I think it was a week or two ago. I was telling him what we're gonna be going soon, and I was asking to finish something up. I was like, all right, we're gonna go. And then I'm like, why aren't you moving? I'm like, well, he says to me, Daddy said we're gonna go now, but I know it's gonna be at least 10 more minutes until you're actually ready. And I was like, oh, let's see if you're right. Yeah, he was right. So we'll sometimes play the game, and I'll tell him too. I'm like, buddy, it's actually super helpful when you come to the store with me, because like I know that you don't like being in the store, so that actually like helps me. I don't go over there and browse. I am like on a mission because I know that like you're gonna run out of patience probably faster than I'm done with my shopping. So it actually helps me with that urgency.
Interesting. There's a practitioner here that I like a lot that wrote a book, parenting book, and she talked about job talk that I've adopted, and I really like it. Like your job. I mean, we talked about like Gibson's self-advocacy and agency, and I think a lot of kids really do feel proud when they can be powerful and enact change.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this idea that like you have a job in this, you have a role, it's helpful to me. When it's genuine, is often a really cool thing for kids to know, like, oh, I'm more powerful than I thought.
No, that's awesome. That is really helpful. And it's been kind of fun to kind of think through some of these things through this lens, because it's been a while since I've kind of thought about it through this sort of like kid clinical lens. So it's
well, thank you for being vulnerable and like bringing all this to your podcast. It's been really fun.
All right. So Liz, the website is brainbuildingbook.com, and we will put links to whatever we've mentioned today on the show notes for this episode. Any final thoughts you want to share with listeners?
I'm really excited to get this information out there. I hope that people find the resources on my website helpful. I love talking about this stuff. I love, helping parents talk through this stuff and just really keeping the conversation positive and present, because it is so, so important for kids to really understand themselves and feel good about the way that they show up in the world.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Liz Angoff. I appreciate you, and I hope that listeners, you enjoyed this. And I guess, I don't know, let me know if you want more content like this, because this is a little bit of a deviation from our norm. But if I'm always game to mix things up a little bit. So let me know, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
Attention. Are you constantly caught in the maybe I should, no, maybe I shouldn't maze? Do you find yourself doing high-stakes juggling act with decisions? Introducing the ADHD Cider. The ADHD Cider is the state-of-the-art, highly scientific, and slightly mystic decision-making tool designed especially for ADHD folks. Does choosing between cereal or toast for breakfast feel like deciding the fate of the universe? With a single spin of the ADHD Cider, your decision-making dilemmas will deflate faster than a bouncy castle at a hedgehog party. This incredible device isn't just a decision maker. Oh no, it's also an all-in-one breakfast maker, quantum physics simulator, lettuce in your teeth checker, and even doubles as a stylish hat. Just imagine never again having to spend 45 minutes deciding what to wear, only to end up rocking the timeless pajamas with a necktie look for your next Zoom meeting. With the ADHD Cider, you can turn that wardrobe conundrum into a sartorial success story. Full transparency, I actually don't know what the word sartorial meant, and I had to look it up. It has to do with fashion. But wait, there's more. It's also equipped with the latest in delay reduction technology. Yes, you heard it right. It will get your taxes done before the deadline, remind you to pick up the milk, and even maybe prevent you from buying that inflatable hot tub on late night infomercials. That sounds really nice, actually. So why wait? Actually, we know why. Make the smart choice with the ADHD Cider. Okay, let's bring it back down to earth for a moment. While we can all have a good laugh at imagining the ADHD Cider, we know decision-making can be a real challenge for those of us with ADHD. The truth is, this whimsical, wonderful gadget doesn't exist. But here's some good news that's very real. ADHD reWired is here for you with support and strategies and conversations and a community that understands you're not alone in navigating the daily challenges of ADHD. We can't offer you a magical decision-making hat, but we do provide tools and tactics that can actually help. Visit ADHDrewired.com today and find the real support you need to master your ADHD journey. You got this, and we're here to help. Go to ADHDrewired.com to find out everything that we offer, show notes for the podcast, all of our services, coaching groups, and community. We hope to see you there.